And Ron Suskind is an investigative reporter and the author of the book, The 1% Doctrine. Let me go to Ron. Thank you for joining us, Ron. You are the expert. What was Cheney up to here exactly? What did he authorize, and what did he keep secret from the Congress?
Well, these are the early days after 9/11. The CIA was feeling it needed to build almost some paramilitary capability to match up with this vast network, this web, this matrix it was building in terms of communications and financial surveillance. We know a lot about that. The view is that essentially CIA would sort of tag Al-Qaeda operatives, jihadists, couriers, and they would lead us to cells, and then the CIA would use its paramilitary capability to take the cells out. You know, at the start of the so-called war on terror, the CIA viewed itself essentially as a fighting agent, as a fighting entity. And part of what we're seeing here are what happened in these early days. Cheney said, as far as I understand from some calls I've been making, look, until we get to a fruition, there's no need to brief this to anybody.
Who the hell is Cheney? First of all, let's get this straight, Ron. I want to get this straight, Ron Korn. Somebody's got to take a refresher course on the U.S. Constitution. Yeah. Even though this government's passed and it's out of history right now, we got to know what the hell happened here. Cheney had no constitutional authority, no executive authority whatsoever under the Constitution. He's simply there to preside over the United States Senate and take his turn if something happens to the president. How did he get the authority to tell the CIA to do anything, much like conduct an undercover activity and not tell the Congress about it? The Congress has authority. He has none. Why did they take orders from him?
Everything.
I just want to know, why did the damn CIA listen to him for a second? He had no executive authority, so how could he get away with it?
Cheney was acting.
This just keeps getting worse and worse and worse.
Look,
why the Congress, why does anybody let that man have executive authority? He had none. Go ahead, your thoughts.
Cheney was acting at this point on matters of intelligence essentially as the president. They were briefing Cheney.
Who said so?
I have it in all my books.
Who told the CIA to take orders from this guy?
Well, you know,
just a minute.
Cheney, Cheney, look, the fact is it's just the way this president, President Bush, structured his White House. CIA would brief the president and the vice president, and then the vice president would essentially take over. He would be there for the daily operational briefs.
Well,
what are we going to do next?
About Bush being the decider, if this guy decides what Congress knows about counterterrorism?
There was a variety of areas that I've written about and others have as well, that the president essentially says, just make sure it gets done and I don't want to know anymore, and Dick will handle it from here. This is one of those areas. So the president, in case of emergency, can be deniable about some of these things that we're doing that he never, or the United States never, should essentially take responsibility for. That was the way this system worked.
Well, is this runaway government? What is this? There's no constitutional checks on this guy because he won't let Congress know about it. He has no constitutional accountability because he has no constitutional authority. In other words, if the president tells Cheney he can do something, he tells the CIA to take orders from him. I mean, did the president ever call the CIA director and say, take orders from Cheney?
It was a structure set up to avoid accountability by the president, specifically. That was the whole idea.
Astounding. Go ahead, David Korn. Are you surprised by this?
Well,
that Cheney can give orders to the CIA?
I have to say I'm not surprised. I mean, as Ron's written, as I wrote in the book with Mike Isikoff, again and again.
Yeah, you guys are writing books after the fact. It didn't do us much good at the time, though.
Well, I'm sorry. You know, a lot of reporters were asleep at the switch back then. You know, the CIA serves the president. If the president says, hey, this is my guy, go see him.
Do you know if he ever told them that?
No, I don't know if he said that. But there's a way in a bureaucracy. You know how Washington works better than anyone else. Yeah. If the president sends a signal, you deal with Dick on this.
Can you imagine Lyndon Johnson calling the CIA and telling them what to do? It's unimaginable.
Well, it depends how you structure the power equation.
Spiro Agnew calling the vice president.
Well, there's no way that Nixon let Spiro Agnew
name a vice president in history who would have given an order to the CIA.
The interesting thing about the story so far is that even Democrats on the Hill have said that there's not necessarily anything that was wrong with what the CIA was trying to do. We can't be sure because we don't have the details.
Right.
But here we have Cheney once again showing his utter disregard.
March 13, 2002, 6 months, 2 days after 9/11, Mr. Bush himself said publicly of bin Laden, quote, I truly am not that concerned about him. Tonight's fifth story, Mr. Cheney now reduced to defending their toughness by sending his daughter out to defend them, spinning that Wall Street Street Journal story, as we will dissect presently, to suggest that it somehow reveals Democratic weakness on national security. Cheney forced to play defense now with the weekend's revelation that it was he who ordered the CIA not to comply with the laws requiring full intel briefings for congressional leaders, followed quickly by today's Wall Street Journal story that what Mr. Cheney concealed from Congress were those failed attempts to come up with CIA plans for getting al-Qaeda, a story that raises a host of questions, considering that congressional leaders had already been briefed about the president's 2001 directive ordering the capture and killing of al-Qaeda members. On June 23rd of this year, CIA officials concerned about misleading Congress still told new director Leon Panetta about the al-Qaeda effort. What details about it no one has yet said. Panetta then told Congress, essentially confirming to the dismay of the right wing, Speaker Pelosi's previous claim that the CIA had not told her in 2002 about the waterboarding it was conducting at that time. Let me turn first to Jane Mayer, author of The Dark Side, the inside story of how the war on terror turned into a war on American ideals, and, of course, a staff writer at The New Yorker magazine. Thanks for your time tonight.
Great to be with you.
Congress and the public obviously have known for years that President Bush authorized the CIA to kill members of al-Qaeda. Probably no one would have an argument with that. So there would have been no reason to withhold that from Congress if that was the end of it. Certainly no reason for that to stun members of Congress, as they reportedly were stunned when the director briefed them last month. So what is it that we're missing in this narrative?
Well, there's some details here, obviously, that we don't yet have, though they seem to be coming together. There's a story in the British press, and it sounds like the New York Times is working on a piece, too, that suggests that these were kind of Mossad-like hit squads that were going to be authorized possibly to operate in some of our allied countries without informing the governments in those countries. So there's some potentially controversial aspects to this that haven't completely surfaced yet. And you know, I mean, part of the reason I think that it's worth thinking about why Congress would be upset about this is if you go back into the history of the CIA's the whole idea of intelligence oversight. It came out in the 1970s after plans for assassination attempts surfaced that involved the CIA. So the idea that Cheney might have specifically tried to keep Congress from knowing about what could be seen as assassination attempts, it's certainly going to push a lot of buttons up on the Hill.
I know that Seymour Hersh's hint of a story in Minnesota in the spring was about stuff run out of the Pentagon and specifically not tied to the CIA, but it does seem rather remarkable that we might be talking about, in a period of months, 2 secret assassination squads somehow touching on the Vice President of the United States. Is that too much of a coincidence? Could we be talking about the same squad or just 2 aspects of the same operation?
Well, I mean, from what we know so far anyway about this particular hit squad was that it was never up and running. They did, though, it sounds like, begin to train specific killers who might be able to rove the world looking for al-Qaeda members. I mean, and we know, of course, we've got a drone program that kills them from the sky, but there's something different about them working secretly in, you know, allied countries. So, and in terms of Cheney, I mean, what we've seen over the last few months, really, is that every time another document comes out about the Bush administration's programs, you can see Cheney's fingerprints on it. And so, basically, take a look at there was a fascinating report that came out this last Friday that was put together by inspector generals in the intelligence community. It's full of details about both Cheney and his former lawyer, David Addington. They were the people who seemed to be behind the warrantless wiretapping program. And somehow, weirdly, it was up to them to decide which other lawyers got to be cued in about this in the administration. So you had this very strange situation where there was this intense secrecy, and many of the subject area experts were kept out of knowing about these programs.
Jane, maybe I'm being a little simple in asking this, but if you put everything together, is it possible that the reason Cheney would have pushed for the secrecy here was not because too much was done too illegally to try to get al-Qaeda, but that ultimately the history of this program would show how little was done to get al-Qaeda?
Well, I mean, I think one of the revelations that came out in that, certainly in the Inspector General's report, was, which is very important, I think, was that the warrantless surveillance program, which twisted our Constitution into knots, turns out to have been ineffective. According to government experts who are nonpartisan, it did not help in any serious way in our anti-terror efforts. So, I mean, I think it is possible that the more we know about some of these programs, the more we're going to find out that they were unnecessary.
Speaking of unnecessary, last point here, the Washington Post reported today that the CIA had hid from Congress. It was called a technically oriented intelligence collection effort unrelated to terrorism suspects, and that was the Wall Street Journal version of this. Should we be skeptical about these anonymous sources suddenly appearing with details that seem so wildly at variance from what we think we know?
Well, I mean, I think that there's probably a real jump ball going on politically to try to paint what was withheld from Congress as unimportant. If, you know, the CIA and some of the Republicans on the Hill are trying to say this wasn't an important program. But if it turns out to have actually been an elite sort of assassin squad that could work in various countries without telling the host countries, I think it's going to be hard to say it was minor.
Yeah, and certainly they won't say it was minor. Jane Mayer of the New Yorker magazine, author of The Dark Side. Great, thanks for your time.